Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Ian Wingfield. I'm Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Before we start the meeting, I just have a few announcements to make about the meeting itself. This meeting will be recorded by the Council and uploaded to Southwark Council's YouTube channel by tomorrow. Please note all guests will have their microphones muted when they join the meeting. You'll be asked to remain on mute unless invited to speak. Please wait until I've given you permission to speak before unmuting your microphone. To ensure that this virtual meeting runs smoothly, only one individual should speak at a time. Any person speaking must be permitted to finish what they are saying without interruption. If I request that an individual stop speaking, they should do so immediately, please. If a member of the committee wishes to speak, could I ask them to indicate this via the chat function or the wave hands function if you have it available. Please note all guests will be made attendees after they have entered the meeting. A message should now have shown on your screen to indicate this has been done. Bearing in mind that a recording of this meeting will be posted on the Council's YouTube channel, if you are planning to speak at this meeting, you may, if you wish, choose to switch off your camera so that only your voice will be heard. Members of the public who are disconnected from the meeting due to technical difficulties should use the link they were sent initially to return to the meeting. If a member of the committee or officer loses internet connection or power, can they please inform Fitzroy Williams or Everton Roberts of this via email or Microsoft Teams immediately, so that we can adjourn the meeting until the connection has been restored. Members of the public are welcome to record, screenshot, or tweet the public proceedings of the meeting. A copy of the Council's protocol for reporting and filming is available on the Council's website. And finally, in the interest of... that wasn't me. Who's that?
Seems to be Norman.
Oh, is it Norman? Oh. And finally, in the interests of health and safety, we will hopefully be taking a 5 to 10 minute comfort break at the end of each hour of our proceedings or thereabouts. Hopefully there won't be too many. Right, if we can get on with the agenda proper. First of all, item 1, can I have apologies? We've already received apologies for the absence of Councillor Alice MacDonald, and I'm very pleased to say that Councillor Sunny Lamb will be reserving in her place this evening. So welcome, Sunny. There's no other apologies. I can see that everybody else is here. Thank you. And so I'm just going to whip round all the voting members to introduce themselves. If you could kindly say your name, ward and party, I'd be most grateful. I'll start with myself. I'm Councillor Ian Wingfield. I'm a Labour member for St Giles Ward, and we'll go alphabetically. So Humera next, please.
Councillor Humera Ali, London Bridge, West Bermondsey Ward, Liberal Democrat.
Thank you. Peter.
Peter Babudu, Councillor for Rye Lane Ward, Labour member and Chair of the Education and Business Scrutiny Commission as well.
Of course. Thank you. Victor.
I'm Councillor Victor Chamberlain. I'm one of the Liberal Democrat councillors for Borough and Bankside Ward. And given the relevance of our report this evening, I should also declare that I'm one of the openly LGBTQ councillors in Southwark.
Yes, well, okay, that's great, thank you. Helen?
Hi, Councillor Helen Dennis, Labour Councillor for Chaucer Wards.
Thank you. Gavin?
Yeah, hi, I'm Gavin Edwards, Labour Councillor for Nunhead and Queen's Road Ward.
Thank you. Sunny?
Hi, I'm Councillor Sonny Lamb, standing as whatever you call me, step in for somebody. Councillor for South Bermondsey Ward. I'm also committee champion for North East Multi Ward. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason?
Hi, Jason Autry, member for St Giles Ward, Labour Party.
Thank you. Victoria.
Hi, I'm Councillor Victoria Lisa, Labour member for Goose Green, also the chair of the Health and Adult Social Care Scrutiny Commission.
Thank you. Jane.
Hello, my name's Jane Salmon. I'm a Surrey Docks councillor for the Liberal Democrats and I'm vice chair of this committee.
You are indeed. Thank you. And Leanne, please.
Yeah, Councillor Leanne Werner. I'm a Labour councillor for South Bermondsey Ward and I'm chair of the Environment Scrutiny Commission.
Great. Thank you all. I'll move on to item 2, notification of any items of business which the chair deems urgent. There are no late items, you'll be glad to hear. Item 3, disclosure of interest and dispensations. Does any member wish to declare any interest or dispensation in respect of any item on the agenda this evening, other than Victor's already indicated? But is there any other interest at all? No? Thank you very much. Okay, item 4, it's the minutes. The outstanding minutes will be, hold on, oh, it's the wrong one. Is it to approve the correct record, the minutes of the meetings held on the 7th? Is this right?
No, sorry, Chair, you was correct the first time. Sorry, the minutes aren't available for this meeting, but they will be on the council website by the end of next week and will be available for approval at the next Overview and Scrutiny Committee. My sincere apologies for them not being at this meeting.
All right. Okay. Thanks for that clarification. Okay. I'm just going to indicate at this stage that I plan to vary the order of business to the effect that the leisure management contract item 7, will be taken last on our agenda this evening. This is just in case we need to move into closed session, given some of the financial information which may come up. Hopefully it won't be required, but I will be guided by our legal representatives whether we need to move into closed session or not, and I hope you will appreciate that. In respect of items 9, 10 and 11, I'm not intending to have any discussion on these items as such because they're purely for information purposes. They're report backs on other previous recommendations that we made. So without further ado then, let's move on to the first substantive item, which is item 5, Strong in Southwark LGBTQ+ community consultation 2018-19. Invited along to present this item are Nathan Lewis, who's chair of the Southwark LGBT network, and Catherine Negus, who's the manager from Health Watch Southwark. So welcome to both of you. I understand, Nathan, that you will be providing some information from a community perspective, and Catherine will be informing us from a health perspective. We have been planning and discussing this item coming forward to OSC since last year, as you all know. So obviously events have overtaken us in many ways, such as COVID-19. But I'm sure a lot of the issues which were raised at the time are just as relevant now, if not more so in some ways. So I'd like to call upon Nathan first. So Nathan, when you're ready, if you'd like to say a few words to the committee members, I'll be most grateful. Thank you. Is he there? He was before. Hello, Nathan. Oh dear, don't tell me we've got this far. Nathan, are you there? You haven't scared him away, Sonny, have you? Goodness me.
He's there, but on mute.
He's showing as a guest. Does that mean he can't unmute himself?
Not yet, I haven't.
He can mute himself.
Right.
Nathan, where are you? You let me get the blame.
Yeah.
Maybe it's I don't know.
So I can see him. It's just he doesn't.
Yeah, he's maybe he's got something.
There we go. Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Here
we
we
can.
go. I
Yeah,
have
yeah.
no idea what happened. It didn't come up on the screen. So I'm going to do a very, very quick introduction. Thank you firstly so much for having myself and Catherine here to present on the work, a substantial piece of work that a lot of work has gone into it. Catherine can attest. So I think I'm just going to take hopefully about 10 to 12 minutes to just do a quick introduction and just to feedback on a community's perspective. Some of it might delve into other health issues that weren't into the report, but it will segue greatly into things that Catherine will be discussing. So just as an introduction, for those who don't know, my name is Nathan Lewis, and I'm the chair of the Southwark LGBT Network. And that is an unincorporated group that has been established in 2002 to basically support, understand the needs of LGBT plus communities in Southwark. Just to give some stats, Southwark is the local authority with the second highest LGBT population in the country, or third, depending on what sources you look at. And it's estimated that there are around 12,000 people in Southwark who identify as being gay and lesbian, 2,000 identify as being bisexual, and 2,000 who identify as having a sexual orientation, which is other, which is massive. This consultation, this report came about from a community Southwark, so from a network point of view, in that there was a greater intelligence for local needs in terms of finding local statistics on how people felt or what people needed. It was difficult for us to find it. So Healthwatch and Community Southwark gratefully allowed us to partner with them to really kind of do a very, very, very broad reaching project. So we were able to obtain the views of health and social care experiences, which Catherine will speak about, as well as how people feel their lived experience as being an LGBTQ plus person. So I'm going to go through some quick points. I think I've got about 10 to 12 minutes. And if you have any questions, please do shoot them at me. I'm speaking.
Sorry to interrupt you, but if you could keep it as tight as possible, because obviously we've got a long agenda. I'm sorry.
Yes. Oh, yes. Yeah. I definitely need to time. So there's a few points I'm going to speak on. So firstly, it's about community safety. In the report, the report we spoke of, I think, 220 people. 64% of them felt unsafe in their local area, and 51% of them felt safe in the borough as a whole. A lot of issues came around about fear of abuse versus actual abuse. And I've actually looked at recent hate crime statistics. So I have the Metropolitan Police Service figures for homophobic incidents, offences and sanction detections. It will be available in the presentation, which have all increased over the past 12 months. So in terms of looking at the recommendation in the report, one of them is looking at how we link with LGBT liaison officers. As I understand, that program is now done, and there is a new program that's been implemented by the Met, which is the Met LGBT plus advisors. So I think for us, one thing that we want to bring as a network is, given that the role is now obsolete, what role does Southwark Council have in ensuring that the program is widely promoted and utilized? Because rather than providing emotional support or understanding, I understand that it's now purely an informative service. Now, in terms of community spaces, the second point, there are no LGBTQ plus specific venues in Southwark. With the closure of XXL and with the closure of the Chateau earlier this year, there are none. So from a network standpoint, I think we're keen to understand where Southwark Council, where they see their role is, or to get a better understanding, particularly as the Bankside Yard development was announced earlier this year in January, which is potentially where a LGBT cultural space will now replace where the former XXL club will be in Bankside Yards, where it's estimated to be during 2022. There's been a retrospective Section 106. For us as a community organisation, we do have concerns around the openness of the procedure, the operating cost, whether peppercorn rent will be involved, and of course, who will be on the community panel. That is something that we would really we would like to be a part of. And I know that we've had some discussions, but I'm just putting it out there for public records. Things like planning and licensing are really key. And so our questions are, and things that we want to put forward are, what issues do you believe the lockdown may have had on the availability of spaces for LGBTQ plus specific use? And we will be assisting with the engagement process around the cultural space. However, previous planning history for some of our members highlights concern. And so is there any way that as councillors that we can be assisted with the process? And that the process is open and transparent and allows local people to feel that they have truly had a part in developing something within their area rather than it feeling tokenistic. I'm in good time. So I think those are some of the major things. Now, some of the things that have really come up as a result of COVID are loneliness and isolation. I know that that is a that has been a place and well-being theme. I know that I went to one of the initial meetings, but this project and this work and what we're doing now really does fit into that. So let me go back now. So with that, and I'll come into that lastly, we want to go into one or two areas that weren't necessarily in the report majorly, but have now come up majorly. The Southwark Council has previously outlined a commitment to providing PrEP for its residents. Now, because of COVID-19 delays and a Department of Health £5 million reduction from 16 million to now 11 million, we would love to know and be able to know whether that's going to have an effect on local people being able to access this. We know that there's been a 40% decrease in HIV infections in men who've had sex with men over the past few years. And this is something that we do want to continue. We know that there is already the Fast Track Cities pledge to reduce or to eliminate all HIV transactions by 2030. I know that Councillor Victor Chamberlain has said 2025. And so PrEP is one of the tools that we believe will really make a difference here. So it would be good to know how that is being implemented. One of our concerns is, I know that there is the BME sexual health contract that I'm part of and I'm engaging in. And one of our concerns is, as a network, there has been no provision there for men who have sex with men. And we do know that, well, in our opinion, and that is, of course, something that PrEP is being used. It's a major tool, and so we're quite concerned that, considering the sexual health concerns within the borough, that has not been implemented. And so there are concerns around the diversity of the borough and whether that's been taken into account. So we've actually been in contact with some major organisations, PrEPster, Terence Higgins Trust and the National AIDS Trust. And I know that they have said that investment must be increased to ensure that those who most need PrEP know about it, can access it where appropriate. And we already know that we're in a time of austerity and that sexual health services, the funds are being cut, but at least they should be made available to everybody who needs them. So our concern is just making sure that PrEP is available to those who need them within the LGBTQ plus community. And so the last point for us is, the last couple of points is, the Southwark Stands Together, which is the Southwark Council response. For us, it's great to see that something like this is taking place. Southwark's queer community is incredibly diverse. You have organisations like Parapride, who support those with disabled, AZ Hub, which has been started by 4 Black queer women who are doing amazing things, supporting local community to reduce social isolation and loneliness. And of course, there's Blackout UK, who have done some research that have shown that Black queer men across London, and including in Southwark, have experienced increased social isolation and loneliness compared to the Black community on a whole, and that information will come out at a later date. And so that's one thing that in terms of the recommendations and diversity, that is one of the later ones. We're intrigued to see the process, and I will be in contact with the community engagement team, and will be looking to really kind of implement it. So let me come back to that. Last point is, sorry, phone's locked. There we go. So in terms of moving forward, the last point that I'll probably make is around COVID-19. It's really transformed how we operate in life. At some point, however, we will be looking to, the country will be looking to move forward. And so in the LGBTQ plus community, where we know that there's social isolation and loneliness, we know that although we're having this online discussion, it's not the same as being able to directly meet someone and talk, and to just have a hug. That touch is so important. Information from GMFA, they've done a report recently that said that almost 4 in 5 LGBTQ plus people during the lockdown have said that their mental health has been negatively impacted by the coronavirus lockdown, and that 67% of under 18s who responded to their survey often felt lonely every day during lockdown. So our concerns are, in speaking with Southwark, what does looking forward mean to you? I think particularly as there are no more venues, but we know that some of them may have been closed, with the starting of something amazing in London, which is the Bankside Yards cultural space. That isn't just seen on a Southwark level, that is seen on a nationwide level. And so we're very keen to make sure that the structures, whether it is the cultural space, whether there are other structures within the borough, that they're available and that they're accessible, and that yeah, I think let's check. Yeah, I think that is mainly it. How, when everything restarts, can we make sure that there are spaces that are adequate for us, where we feel safe, where people don't have to worry about walking home late, where hate crime, I know that's one of the highest in the country. What is Southwark currently doing around those things? I think those are highlighted in the recommendations. And how can we work together as a network with Healthwork Southwark and with other organisations to kind of move forward and come together? That's just what I want to bring through to you.
Okay, no, that's loud and clear. Thank you very much, and we appreciate the time you've given in explaining all those points, which are obviously very serious points, and the members of the committee fully take those on board. Can I bring Catherine in at this stage before we open it up to other members of the committee for questions? Catherine, could you just speak for a little on your perspective on this, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks, Nathan, for all the updates from the network's perspective as well. I'm really, really glad to see this one coming to the committee now. So the Healthwatch perspective obviously comes at it from that focus, and when looking at health, what our study last year showed is that the picture is mixed, but in many ways quite concerning, with quite notable proportions of the LGBT people who responded expressing their concerns about the inclusivity of our health services. I'll talk you through a few of the findings on that, and then also outline some of the recommendations we made, some of which were for the NHS, but some of them may be of particular interest from a council perspective. So I think one of the most striking statistics we found was that only 26% of the people who responded agreed that the mainstream health services we have in the borough were inclusive and appropriate for LGBT people. So that's only around a quarter. So we had some people giving examples of quite respectful and sensitive care, including specific GP surgeries. Some people said they appreciated visible LGBT staff or recognition for their partners, but we found that this wasn't always happening. We found most of the less positive comments were relating to sexual and mental health services in particular, which we asked about in depth, so I'll talk about those in a moment. One hint of a theme to note is the occasional role of religion in the borough and people feeling uncomfortable. So for example, we heard about counselling taking place in church venues. People may be feeling unsure about the religious feelings of the care provider, and that is quite an interesting kind of factor that's quite specific to Southwark, that's worth considering at times. We found that 82% of the respondents were not aware of any LGBT specific healthcare services in the borough where they might feel more comfortable. Only 18 of the 210 were able to name some of those, and that included some specialist help at mainstream services, but also organisations like the Rainbow Clinic, the Caldecott Centre and the Metro Charity. So there are some out there, but they may not always be well publicised. On the other hand, 71% of people felt that there was a need for LGBT specific services around health in the borough, and the reasons given for that around accessibility, staff attitudes, or simply people preferring to discuss matters like sex with people from their own orientation. The large and also in itself diverse LGBT population, as Nathan mentioned, it's not just one cohesive block of people, but there's intersectionalities and differences even within that group, that large group. And people felt that meant that there was a particular need in this borough for specialised services. People referred to higher levels of mental health need within this community, and as Nathan mentioned, loneliness and isolation played a big part in that, and that's something that we will be seeing increasing at the moment. And also other specific challenges such as a perceived rise in chemsex. Small number of people also mentioned a specific need for trans-specific support. So that's a particular group within the LGBT community who felt that they were particularly poorly served. So talking a little bit about sexual health services in particular, again, the proportion of people who felt they were inclusive was low at 23%. Of those who had accessed sexual health services in the last couple of years, half of those people had chosen to go outside the borough. And those included specialist services such as Clinic and Dean Street, which are LGBT specific. That was the key reason for people choosing to go out of the borough, although there were other factors like quality of service, privacy, appointment availability. One person even referred to having experienced harassment outside the Camberwell Sexual Health Centre and felt safer going into town. Some of the difficulties in the mainstream services included staff making assumptions or not taking people's sexuality into account when they were discussing things like contraception, pregnancy, STIs. And some people felt that having to keep correcting these assumptions felt a bit like being forced to come out over and over again. Thinking about mental health services, we found 42% of our respondents had accessed services within the past 2 years, which is a high proportion, and that might not even reflect the unmet needs among people who are not accessing those services. Strikingly, of those people, over a quarter were accessing mental health care privately, which might indicate a gap in the public services. Some of the gaps that people described were waiting lists, which is something we hear about across the population, but also a need for services that are more friendly to LGBT people, that have got specific expertise, cultural competence. So again, that's about the intersectionality element. And one particular need noted was for male rape survivors. I'll stop there on the run through of the findings, but just to outline some of the recommendations we made. These were overall more general than the usual recommendations Healthwatch makes because of the sheer breadth of this project. Quite a lot of them are already recognised as good practice, but at the moment it's unclear, and the survey reinforces the need to ensure that these are happening consistently. So our recommendations to provided providers included things like comprehensive training on inclusive care as per the equality duty. And that should include working with LGBT people and patients to define what good inclusive care looks like. We have heard about some initiatives, for example, at King's College Hospital that have been happening over the last year or two to try and to work more intensively on that. Other recommendations, schemes promoting inclusiveness, that kind of the visibility of inclusiveness. So, for example, the Rainbow Lanyard initiative in the NHS was felt by some people to be reassuring. We've heard that there's been initiatives to take that further within pharmacy, but it can still go further. Quite a big one was about markers on patient records to highlight people's sexual identity or gender identity so that they didn't have to go through this experience of coming out again and again. And that included having non-binary options, which we know has been an issue across NHS systems for a while. Another issue that is recognised across the NHS is simply not having records of people's gender and sexuality, so that when experience data is collected, it's not really clear how people's experience are affected by that. Recommendations to commissioners, so including the council, but also strongly the CCG. We recommended that a JSNA for LGBT people be produced and that should be a reference point for the implementation of different strategies. We did hear about moves towards that last summer. I'd be interested to hear about any updates on that and whether that's being taken forward. We also asked that commissioners across services be mindful of the 71% of our respondents who felt there's a need for LGBT specific services. Sometimes we hear about kind of drives towards integration of services and removing specialist services, but it's really important to hear that that's not what people felt was needed. And the final one I want to mention is that we would like to hear, particularly from NHS organisations, about refresher training for different kinds of clinicians on topics like gender transition, PrEP, as Nathan has gone into in detail, fertility options, and LGBT specific mental health concerns. I know as the CCG merger has taken place, there will be more ways in which we'll be raising some of these recommendations through the Equality Committee there, for example. But I'm also really keen to hear any thoughts from this committee and the council on how some of those might progress. So thanks very much for listening.
No, that's our pleasure. Thank you very much for relaying that information to us. There's a couple of points I wanted to make before I throw it open to the other members. In relation to COVID-19 more generally, we will be looking at this on a regular basis as a committee over the next 12 months. So, this will form a part of other issues that we will be reviewing during that period. And I know my colleagues, and I know Councillor Lisa will mention in a minute, on the Health Scrutiny Commission, they will also be interested in these type of issues as well. The other issue that we will be looking at as a main committee will be regeneration related matters. So the points that you raised, Nathan, in relation to venues, etc., and involvement, then that will form part of our discussions as well. Not necessarily on specific sites as such, which is something that the relevant cabinet member will take up. But I just wanted to make one more general point before opening up to questions, is that yes, we're receiving this report. We will be forwarding this report on to the cabinet, and because of the time lapse between when this report was initially done and COVID-19, etc., what I would like to suggest is that I know members may pick up on certain points now, but what I would like to suggest to both Nathan and Catherine, if you think there is anything else which isn't covered either appropriately enough or isn't in there at all, then by all means please email us separately so that we can tag that along with the report when it goes to the cabinet, because as you can appreciate, we're just with the best possible respect, we're only backbenchers here. We're not cabinet members. We're not decision makers as such. So we're here to listen to your reports, which we can then base recommendations on to go to the cabinet. So after this meeting, that would be useful if you could provide that. and we could add that on. Sorry for being a bit long-winded, but I just wanted to sort of clear the process of it at this stage. So, if without further ado, I've got Gavin for the first question, please.
Thank you, Ian. And just before I get to my question, I just wanted to say that just to pay tribute to Gabby Charing, who is somebody I knew very well indeed, was a founder member of LGBT Network, was a personal friend I know, incredibly active, a warrior for social justice is how I would describe her. And I just wanted to say how sadly she will be missed, and to pay tribute to her and all the good work that she did as well. So just on my question to you, Nathan, if that's okay, you mentioned Southwark Stands Together and the process, and you thought that that's a a really important event, and that you want to see LGBTQ members of the Black community involved in that. So there have been a number of events already, and there's one or two others coming up as well. Do you feel that that has thus far been a successful event in terms of ensuring that LGBTQ members of the Black community have been involved in that and felt able to get involved in that, or are there lessons to be learned in the future for those kinds of events? Thank you.
I could be corrected, but as far as I know, that isn't something that's really been discussed within the Black LGBTQ plus community. So I think I've had conversations with the community engagement team, and so from once this meeting has done, I will be attending the next one and really looking to promote it. I think there's something to be said, and in my other guises, looking at how myself included in the community understand the importance of engaging with these structures, and also the importance of the data and contributing to it. Because if there's no information, then I guess sometimes you who are there in these positions, you won't know. And so I will be looking and speaking with Jess from the team to think at the best ways that are culturally appropriate to then communicate it. I think also there could be a whole other discussion around distrust of structures, being in certain places and working in certain places in Southwark, and then just having things like, after all this time being racially gaslighted and being told things like, I've had incidents where I've been told certain things, have been told they don't mean anything, they're not racist, it doesn't really mean anything. And that really is incredibly jarring, and it does some bizarre things to your thought process. So it's a long-winded process, but something that I'm more than happy to support, and also to engage other organizations such as Blackout UK. I think one of them is involved in this conversation.
Okay, thank you. Sunny, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Nathan and Catherine, for your presentation. I just have a few questions. I'm going to ask Nathan, as somebody from the LGBTQ plus community, also from the Black community, do you think, do you feel unsafe? And if so, why? That's my first question. And of course, the second one is in relation to isolation, which obviously came out in the presentation. If majority of LGBTQ community did not feel isolated and are not aware of the services being provided, why do you think that is the case? And how do you think the situation can be improved? And of course, role of a local authority and LGBT plus a community in themselves in improving things. And my final question, if you forgive me, is also have you consider collaborating with other boroughs in terms of especially when you mentioned that because of the resources and so on, whether collaborating with other boroughs that might also expand the range of services and that are available to the LGBT community. Thank you.
Are you on mute, Nathan?
Sorry about that. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Lambie. You answered 3 very, very intense questions, and so I may ask you to remind me of what they are, if that's okay. But it's fine. I'm going to answer the last question, which is where you spoke about collaboration. I think collaboration is key. Working in a silo in this time is, for me, I think it's a waste of resources and time. So us as a network, we are part of a number of different networks. One of them is called the London LGBT Forums Network, which is chaired by somebody called David Robson, who is chair of the Wandsworth LGBT Forum, and I'm the co-chair, Southwark. And so we are connected with all of the borough-based LGBT networks in London. So we already have that connection on a London level. So all of these discussions that I'm having with you, I think we're already having on a local level. More closely, recently I've been having meetings with the LGBT forums in Lewisham and in Lambeth, because we share resources when it comes to things like mental health and sexual health. And pardon me, due to the implementation of the BME sexual health contract, there's been more of a need for us to have discussions that really make sure that we're included where we may feel that we're not. I think your first question, I think, was around identifying as being Black and being LGBTQ+. Can you remind me?
And whether you feel safe, in terms of feeling safe, yes.
I think if you're asking me personally, as an individual, I feel safe. I have been able to do sexual health interventions in West Africa, in the Caribbean, in the US, in Jamaica. And so for me, I've come across a number of situations where there's been a gun beside me. So for me, Southwark is absolutely, I feel safe in Southwark, but I do understand the issues that others have. But for me personally, I feel safe. But when people do see the reports of, I think last year, I think in Camden, there were 2 lesbians who were assaulted on a bus, and I think one of them had their handbag stolen. Seeing that and having it played in the news is something that, if you're already anxious, can really just make it rocket and rise. And if you don't, make you concerned. But me personally, I know Southwark very well. And for me, I feel safe. But for others, that may not be the case.
So the other question was the issue of around isolation, because if I heard you correct, you said some feel isolated. Is it because of the reason why they feel isolated, because they cannot come out openly to declare who they are because of the community backlash? Do you think that's the case, and what can we do to improve that?
I think you've really kind of hit it on a very, very complex issue. I think, and Catherine used the term intersectionality. I think we're all very different and very complex people. In terms of social isolation, some of it is just about fear. I think I can recall being in, it's been recorded, in Bermondsey and in Rotherhithe, and have people consciously come up to me and tell me the culture of our area, when that wasn't what was implied. It meant that It's one thing to say that, you know, historical culture, and then it's another thing to mean we don't really want you in our area doing things. I think those are some of the things that when you don't feel welcome, you feel isolated. There are a multitude of reasons. There's things about fear of coming out and what that means and what that happens in the social groups that you then have to look out to. I think for some people, it could be, you know, Southwark has a significant trans community, but for some people, they may not feel safe. I think knowing that the government changes and that they may not be allowing trans people to be free and to self-define who they want to be and have those rights, that makes people feel unsafe, because I know that people may feel that they will be attacked. We know that trans women are under threat to some extent, particularly in Southwark. Anecdotally, I hear loads of stories, but these are not the things that I hear in print. And those are the things that, until they are there in print and we have the statistics, it's anecdotal. So we are now looking and working with organizations to make sure that we have the statistics and the evidence to really back up the things that we know are taking place.
I think that probably that question also tallies with my third question, which touch upon the services that are available and why the LGBT plus community are not accessing them. Some are even not aware. So what do you think we are not doing now about we should be doing more to educate community? Because even having a separate hideout will not break that prejudice. Because we are one member of the bigger community, and therefore everybody should feel free to express themselves. And therefore, what else do you think we should be doing to let people understand, appreciate, and accept, that we are all same and we are all equal?
I think in terms of services, if I just probably start with health, I think the Southwark stands together from a race equality standpoint, hearing those experiences and hopefully making sure that queer experiences are included in that will really be helpful. And I think hopefully you will hear the breadth just a little bit. I'm talking about racial gaslighting very shortly because I have time, but these kind of things do eventually weigh on your system. In terms of services, I know that Catherine's spoken about some of them, about CliniQ. CliniQ now has a presence in Camberwell. So we've been in discussion with Camberwell Sexual Health Service to look at how they can make themselves more available and more visible. And for a start, social media has a massive part to play in that. What we need to do is, I think if we're looking and looking at this as being a seldom heard community and thinking about the ways that we communicate as queer people, it's the internet, it's apps, it's websites, it's the, well, some of the queer youth clubs that are around, it's the bars, it's the pubs, it's knowing that there are spaces, and I think it is actually in the borough, that there was a massive list of venues where people actually do feel safe, that there are LGBT friendly spaces, but sometimes people just don't know that they exist. So from a recommendations point, I know there was a Mayor of London, a GLA initiative for businesses to have a flag or something, you know. if you think about the oh my gosh, I've forgotten the word, the rainbow lanyard, to have a rainbow flag or something to let people know that you're safe here, that your needs will be met here, that you can be in a friendly, safe environment where however you refer to identify will not be judged but will be taken, and you will be loved and cared for. But just for time, I'll stop. I'm more than happy to stop there. We've got a busy schedule.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Nathan. Yeah.
Well, I've been very indulgent with you, Sonny. I hope you understand that.
I'm the only foreigner here, don't worry.
I'm sure not this for this committee. I think you've asked all your questions in one go tonight. Thank you very much. You've been very helpful. But can I just say that, seriously though, we're nearly an hour now into this meeting. I've got 5 more members wanting to speak, and we still haven't got to the 2 heaviest items on the agenda. I know Councillor Ali and others, are keen to have regular breaks, and I really don't want to be here till 10 o'clock at night. So can I ask members and contributors to be as concise as possible and only ask one question? Otherwise, we will be here till very, very late. And I know we've got nothing else better to do, but I would really appreciate it if you could keep all your contributions fairly concise in the interest of health and safety, at least. So I'll call on Victor now, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks very much, Catherine and Nathan, for your presentation. So much for coming tonight. I first asked for this report to come on the agenda over a year ago when the report was released. So thank you, Chair, for finally arranging time for it to happen. It's a shame that there wasn't a cabinet member to join us tonight, because actually, a lot of the findings and recommendations.
Councillor Laurie is joined, so
has she? Oh, fantastic.
I'm going to bring her in after you've.
Okay. Well, she wasn't here for a lot of the report. I didn't see.
She couldn't get into the meeting. She couldn't get into the meeting.
I suppose the other point as well is a lot of these issues are actually around a much broader agenda as well. It's not just around equalities. It is around health. It is around access to spaces and making sure regeneration is queer friendly. But I'm really delighted that Ian, that you've said, Chair, that you've said that we will be taking this to cabinet, because I think the cabinet must go through this, because you can see just by how long we're dealing with it that this is coming. There's some really concrete, solid recommendations that the council needs to adopt from this report. And I hope maybe at the end of it we can maybe just sum up some specific recommendations from the discussion that we've had so far. I wanted to ask lots of questions because it's such a huge topic, but I'm mindful of time. But I'm particularly keen to talk. Maybe if you give me the indulgence of having 2 questions, I did indicate first. I wanted to ask around healthcare, because we did. The report does show that 3/4 of LGBTQ people in Southwark are struggling to access appropriate healthcare. I've seen that. I've experienced homophobia at my GP. I've struggled to get PrEP from Burrell Street. Just this month, I had to go to Hammersmith to go and get onto the PrEP trial. And actually, that is not acceptable. That took me half a day. And for anyone that's having to work, that's not. I'm lucky that I was in a position to be able to do that, but I wasn't able to do that for months and months. So we know that PrEP makes a difference. We know that Southwark has the 2nd highest number of HIV cases in the country. I'm interested in how many other people like me are unable to access the drug that we know can make a big difference to tackling HIV in a borough where it's really needed. So I wonder if maybe you could elaborate on that. Also, just sticking on health issues, I know, Nathan, you have mentioned some of the needs specifically of the trans community. That's an area that trans people still face the most appalling discrimination on a daily basis in our borough. But I'm interested, maybe Catherine, if you'd like to elaborate on any of the specific healthcare needs of the trans community, because I think it's really important that we don't lose sight of how we can support that community in particular. And then, so should we do that? And then I'll just ask my second question, if that's all right, Chair.
I'll be indulgent, as I was the Councillor Lamb.
Shall I talk briefly about the trans needs? Okay, so I'm doing this off the top of my head, and it was a while ago, so forgive me if I miss anything, but what I remember around trans needs, so there were people who stated that there just were not trans-specific services in the borough and the need to go outside borough, so I'm glad to hear Clinic U has moved into Camberwell. We heard people stating that they felt they were always having to educate their GP practices about being trans and about what kind of care they needed whilst trans. There were issues around prescriptions for hormonal drugs, I believe was one of the issues. I I think it was quite a small number of people who responded about trans-specific issues, but there was quite a clear feeling among them that you can't just lump everybody together as LGB, but the trans element in particular needs to be remembered, and that it goes beyond kind of your standard sexual health services. I don't know if Nathan wants to add to that from what he remembers on the detail. You're on mute, Nathan.
No, off my head, I don't have anything to add regarding the report. Those were the major things. Just the constantly having to tell your healthcare provider how to identify you. Wait, there was something also around the length of time that it gets to actually go to the gender identity clinic. If you are considering having gender affirming surgery or treatment, that is something that is definitely there that needs to be included. And that's off my head. I think anything else, I will make sure that I include further on and pass on to Ian.
And just on the PrEP issue, do we have any idea how large the cohort of people that potentially could benefit from full access to PrEP is? Because we did do a motion last year where the whole council unanimously agreed that we should be fully funding the rollout, and that still hasn't happened. And actually, it'd be really good if we could get an idea for how big the community that's not being served at the moment is.
Oh my gosh! In terms of the population. I'm off my head. I really wouldn't know. I know that from the last statistics, I think there's supposed to be 12,000 gay and lesbian identifying people, but I don't know what that means in terms of gender identity. I think what I would probably do is there is an amazing organization called Prepster, who I've been speaking with. And I think they would be best placed. So if I note that down as something to get back to you with.
Joe, I'll be quick with the second question. So Nathan, you mentioned no, it wasn't. You mentioned, Nathan, the fact that we've managed to get this agreement from Bankside Yards, and I along with my ward colleague David Noakes worked with Councillor C2 on making sure that we got that memorandum of understanding, and that's a really fantastic place for us to be, because it's as you've highlighted, the loss of queer spaces in the borough is so impactful on on our well-being and vitality, but so that will only come to something that's meaningful if there is that genuine consultation with the community, if it's actually a business model that potentially can be accommodating of all the different potential organisations or groups that could use the space. You talked about the need to make sure that the wider LGBT community is assisted to be part of the process of being involved. So I just wonder if you could elaborate a bit more on how you think we could do that specifically. And I suppose it does link in again to Sunny's question about how do we get through to those hard to reach LGBTQ groups and so that, because we know, for example, there's big hidden queer communities in so that whether or not that's in the Latin American community or in the different Black communities, or even in groups, in people that don't feel comfortable still to come out from any background.
Oh, I'm still here. Sorry, I thought I muted myself. My response to that would be true engagement takes money. So I think firstly, Southwark Council would really have to look in its budget and see what they have to allocate for this process. I think during just getting this consultation and getting 200 plus people, Catherine did tell me to slow down and to watch what I was doing on a number of occasions, because it is exhausting connecting with people. But organizations if us as a community organisation, others need to be better funded. Secondly, my advice would be, we are already in discussion with a number of organisations around this. So I would probably say, rather than leaving it to those in council who may not have the expertise, allow us to communicate to our community in the way that we know best. I think I've already kind of highlighted the fact that we're part of greater networks, the London LGBT+ forum, where loads of people are from completely different boroughs, but there is incredible crossover. So I can speak to somebody who might be in Harrow or in Merton, but they know plenty of people who are based in the borough. I think an adequate time period needs to be given, secondly, particularly with COVID, because face-to-face engagement is no longer going to be the major form. For us, it's been social media, it's been having those regular newsletters, it's working with the organizations that know and have great links to the community, like AZ Hub, like Blackout UK, like Prepster, like NAS, oh my gosh, London Friend, all of Stephen Lawrence Centre, all of the organizations have major links. And I think what I've said from our standpoint is, even locally, Community Southwark within the borough, I think we are more than happy to, and I think we have had some discussions with councillors, that we're more than happy, and we have already started the process of connecting with groups and individuals in order to do that. However, appropriate time and resources need to be in place.
Okay, I'm going to bring Jin in now because he's got a comment to make, and then I'm going to take a break because I know Councillor Ali wasn't feeling too well. So, are you there, Jin?
Yes, I am. Thank you, Chair. It was just a brief update on PrEP, and it's really good news. So post the pilot that you're probably aware of, there is now a PrEP allocation, and PrEP is being rolled out nationally, and hopefully it will soon be accessible through the usual route, i.e. through clinics. Some of that detail needs to be worked out. Locally, we do have quite a good relationship with the digital service, and we're exploring whether or not that might be an option, but we're still waiting for some of the finer grain detail to come out nationally. But certainly it's looking really positive, and it is an important service for our gay men. So watch this space.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Not just gay men, though. We should just be clear, shouldn't we? It's
all right.
It's
okay.
men
All right.
MSM.
All right.
MSM.
Right. I'm going to take a 5-minute break now. So so if we come back, it was that takes us to 7:17. Yes, we'll come back at 7:17, and we'll continue from there. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes, please remember to turn off your mics and cameras. Thank you.
Oh, I'm unmuted. Oh, sorry. Sorry. No, no, not that one. That one.
Peace.
Hello.
Hello.
We all back up? Everybody?
Yep, I'm back.
Okay, good. Okay, I just want to reiterate a point, if I may, that although I appreciate contributions from members, what I would really appreciate, nobody else would really appreciate, is actually just sticking to asking questions rather than making statements. Otherwise, we will be here till 11 o'clock at night. And we've got some really important items on this agenda. And you're doing a disservice to those other items by making statements instead of asking questions. So I'm just putting that out now so everybody's clear, and I will cut people off if they continue to make statements. Right. Okay. So Victoria, I believe you wanted to make a comment on this item.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to thank Nathan and Catherine for presenting that survey, but also as the Chair of the Health Scrutiny Commission, I'd like to invite you to maybe a forthcoming meeting, because obviously we've concentrated on care homes, but second part of what we want to concentrate on mental health, but also in the BME communities and other hard to reach communities and stuff. So I'd like to invite you along to that, because I've looked at your recommendations, and it'd be interesting to see about care needs and carers needs and assessment, and a lot of what you've said in terms of having LGBTQ friendly spaces and whatever. So as a commission, we'd like to look at that and think, how can we feed in some of the stuff that you found in your survey to what should be happening in the borough. So I'd like to invite you along to Health Scrutiny Commission meeting in the forthcoming months, if that would help, because to give your community evidence, because it's really important to hear from you, delivering on the ground, what should we do as a council. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all I needed to say, Chair.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. I appreciate that, Victoria. Humera now, please.
Hi, Chair. Is it possible that so firstly, can I say that this is an excellent report, but my question actually is not for the people who have brought the report, but it's actually for Councillor Lurie. And because having read this report, I don't know if I could beg your indulgence, because there is a motion that we passed in council last year, and I keep on coming back to this motion. Some of the recommendations that are sitting in this report will be answered by some of the recommendations we all approved in the motion, and we just haven't had that progress and that work. So my question, Chair, is can I address Councillor Lurie and ask for when the hell are we going to get some action on this, because this is affecting the Black Lives Matter works, this is affecting this LGBT works, and it feels like this is old news now.
Okay, we got the gist of it. Thank you. As I said earlier, I'm going to bring Councillor Lurie in once the questions are finished. I've got one more person. Peter Babudu, are you there, Peter?
Thank you, Chair, and I will keep it very brief. A really powerful report. I just wanted to ask if both Nathan and Catherine, really, if we're satisfied that the survey, like if any new and additional work is needed to kind of understand people's opinions and positions, and given the size of the population and that we're able to survey 200, are they kind of comfortable that it's representative enough?
I think given the size of the local community, that isn't enough. In fact, some of the recommendations within the report suggested that potentially LGBT organisations, but supported by funders or potentially within the public health team, could work together to commission more in-depth pieces of work around this. So some of the topics we suggested were intersectionality of sexuality and gender identity with other identities. So that would include age, faith and ethnicity. Another one was around disability and inclusion within the LGBT community, and that would include in particular issues around venues, I think came up around that one. And the third one was about the needs of lesser heard people within the LGBTQ plus community, and that included trans, non-binary and Latin American people. So we're very much aware that this was a really broad look and very much a starting point.
Okay, great, good. Okay, I'm now going to bring Councillor Lurie in. I know that obviously she was late to the meeting because of technical issues, and so she wasn't appraised of our earlier discussions. But just to let her know before she comes in, what I said before, and the committee agreed with me, is that because it's been over 12 months since this report was compiled, obviously there's been a lot of changes in the world since then, especially with COVID-19, and therefore what I recommended is that perhaps Nathan and Catherine could kindly add some supplemental issues, recommendations, which we would then pin to the report, which we would then send on to you, Councillor Lurie, for you to give it consideration at the cabinet level. And you've heard Councillor Ali mention obviously previous motions that were agreed by Council Assembly as well. So perhaps as part of that process, you'd like to consider all of that in the round. Would you like to speak at this? Yes,
I'm happy to come in. Thanks, Ian. Yeah, I only just joined the meeting. This isn't an item that this isn't anything that's come to me as cabinet member yet, so I'm not appraised of the report or any of the issues that are in it. I kind of presume it's coming to you guys before it gets to me, and I'm happy to take on any considerations, including any new recommendations that you want to include within it. Hamar, in terms of your specific question, as you will know, in light of everything that was going on with COVID, the communities team had obviously been under an increasingly large amount of pressure to deal with the more immediate issues that they were being presented with. I have been promised an update from Stephen Douglas and his team on where we are in regards to that motion, and both myself and Councillor Okoto have followed that up. I have not yet had that update, so I can't provide you with any update, but as soon as I do, I will be able to do so, and I will chase Stephen again after this meeting to find out whether we can get a date for when that will be available.
Thank you. Just for the benefit of Nathan and Catherine, I've posted in the chat a bit more detail about what I was talking about.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Lurie. Okay, in light of what Councillor Lurie said and what I recommended before, so can we agree that this paper goes on to Councillor Lurie, plus additional recommendations as maybe areas that Nathan and Catherine might wish to add? Is everybody in agreement with that? Yes?
Agreed.
Yes.
Agreed.
Thank you very much. We'll send that on. And again, I'd just like to thank Nathan and Catherine for coming along this evening and for saying what you did. And, you know, I'm not going to make any other long comments, but I know that there's a feeling that somehow, as you say, these issues can get sort of neglected to a certain extent if they're not sort of put to the forefront of people's attention. So that's why we do really appreciate you coming along this evening, as you say, especially when there's issues to deal with loneliness and isolation in particular. So thank you once again, and I'm glad you eventually got here and we were able to have this discussion and to send this report forward. So thanks again, Nathan and Catherine, and
thank you.
Wish you well. Good night. Right, okay, so let's move on now to item 6, which is the interview with the police borough commander, Colin Wingrove. I hope Colin's here this evening. Is he?
Good evening, Chair. I've just put my my video on, so good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe you've got Superintendent Howells with you. Is that correct?
Yes, he's right next to me. You can't quite see him on the camera, but a bit of technology has meant we're sharing
Okay.
screens. Here we go.
Oh yeah, there he is. I can see him now. Welcome, gentlemen. Thank you for giving your time this evening. We know how much pressure you're under at the moment, and I guess your presence is required in many different places at the same time. But we do appreciate the fact that you've given this evening to come along and to address the committee and to take questions from members of the committee. And thank you for your patience for waiting this evening until we got round to this item. I'd also like to point out that we do have Councillor Evelyn Akoto on the line, who's the Cabinet Member for Community Safety and Public Health. And I believe, is it Caroline Thwaite is here, the Assistant Director for Community Safety and Partnerships? Is Caroline here?
Stephen Douglas is attended on her behalf, Chair.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Everton. Okay. So, Colin, sorry. Without further ado, if you'd just like to give us an opening speech, and then I'll open it up to the floor for members to ask you questions, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'll try and be concise. I do have a tendency to go on, so I won't be offended if you cut me short at any time.
No, you're in good company here. Don't worry about it.
Okay. Well, so thank you for this opportunity and for inviting me to speak tonight, and also to hear from members and to take questions and so on. It's been about 5 months or so since I arrived, and obviously quite a time to join a new BCU and take responsibility for policing in Southwark with COVID and the challenges that we've seen there. Just a very brief bit of background on myself. Before I joined here, I was the OCU Commander for Roads and Transport Policing Command, so responsibility, for example, for the Met delivery of the Vision Zero strategy to reduce road death on London's roads. And that's something I still keep an eye on, and something I'm still keen to explore, aside from all the other challenges I'll come on to. And I think what's my early impressions of policing in Southwark, firstly, is a really strong partnership with Southwark Council at all levels. I think it's outstanding, and I see every single day extraordinarily good work between the police and the local authority and many other partners in tackling many of the challenges that we face. So, which is really healthy and really good. Also, the police officers and staff and special constables and cadets who all form part of the police family that look after Southwark. Incredibly impressive and professional, courageous and caring about the local community. And one of the things that struck me over the sort of COVID period is the number of officers and staff who do sort of unsung hero things in the community, whether it's helping at a food bank, whether it's packing parcels in schools for school meals and so on. Cadets who have been continuing their sessions online. We've got a really healthy, strong police family that want to do some really good things, make a difference for residents and everybody in Southwark. And I think from my point of view, so looking at some of the priorities, if you like, and some of the areas of focus for us at the moment. So clearly, we want to play and have played a really key part in London's response and the national response to the COVID health crisis that we've seen, and we'll continue to do so. Obviously, the lockdown measures have changed over the last few weeks a few times, and we've seen some enormous challenges throughout the whole period, where officers and staff have responded in all sorts of different ways to play their part in keeping people safe and protecting the NHS and so on. And that will continue. And I think part of that as well, looking to the future, what are the impacts? So communities experiencing a high degree of trauma, economic difficulties, educational difficulties, and so on in the future, and how we as a service have that as, you know, in terms of showing empathy and support, and recognising some of the challenges that may lie ahead as well. So that remains an area of focus for us, and again working with the council and others. I think in terms of crime, so we've seen during the period crime decrease in pretty much every area, and we're now seeing that increase. We're still tracking under the levels of last year in pretty much all crime levels, but the lines between last year and this year are narrowing, as you know, we enter not only a hot summer period, and have been in a hot summer period, but also as more people are out on the streets, more premises, licensed premises are open, shops and retail and so on, and people are starting to edge towards a normality. But you know, I'm sure we all agree we're still a long way off from there. So our main crime focus remains bearing down on violent crime. So in Southwark, as many of you will know, so that will include robbery, for example, and where we've seen high levels historically in the borough in the last year. That will include violent crime and knife crime, gang-related crime. So that whole area of sort of public space violence, but also really important to note, domestic abuse and violence against women and girls, and a very strong partnership strategy in relation to that, and how we play our part there is also really important. And also it's interesting listening to the previous item in terms of just hate crime and homophobic crime, and I'll touch on some of the engagement work shortly, but it was really interesting to listen there. And firstly, some food for thought, because we're a learning organisation, so there's, I think, some areas there for us to link into, something around our neighbourhood offer, and also we're reviewing our hate crime approach at the moment. And we do have some hate crime advisors that work with officers who are trained officers that help neighbourhood groups and investigators. So for another time, I won't touch on it here too much, but just a note there, you know, listening to the previous item. Burglary as well remains a local priority too, and we've historically seen high levels of domestic burglary, and again that will remain as people see working from home has been a great crime prevention tool in terms of reducing burglary. But obviously, you know, people will start to go back at some point. And I think that the third sort of area for us is around community engagement, which is a hugely broad area. Again, was touched on in the last, well, not just touched on, it was discussed in the last item. But so, and this is in many different ways. So the outcome is around improving trust and confidence in local policing, and that includes, you know, how we engage with local people on the wards to solve local problems, work out what local people would like us to do crime-wise and community safety-wise, and go and do it and reduce antisocial behaviour. I think the other area, so if we look at you know, the terrible events in the US and what happened in George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, and I know that the council undertook taken a listening exercise, and I'm taking part in a panel discussion in due course as well. So, and also the focus around stop and search too. So in terms of engagement there's a whole raft of things that we're starting to do. Some things we're doing more of, some things are new, and it's just really, you know, a whole host of areas really around how we talk about why we undertake stop and search, think about how we undertake it, for example, but also how we engage more widely with communities about a whole and play our part addressing a whole range of inequalities that ultimately present, you know, community safety concerns. So and I think, you know, there's a, you know, I'm sure out of the listening exercises and the discussions that have been had in recent weeks, there'll be a strong part for local police to play in that, and I certainly give my commitment to do that, and to help play a role in addressing inequalities, and certainly from our point of view, in terms of criminal justice inequalities. But at the same time, it's keeping people safe, and keeping all people safe, I think is incredibly important. So I think so that community engagement piece will be a feature for us for quite some time, and not just really around stop and search. As I said, it's about being responsive to local needs and concerns, recruitment, so increasing opportunities as police as an employer, and again, our representation will be part of that too, increasing the number of Black, Asian, minority ethnic people within the police service to be a representative service will be really important. And we made huge strides in that direction as an organisation, and we've got much more to do and want to do. And a lot around our sort of youth work through schools, primary schools, cadets, and I think looking around sort of serious youth violence and youth crime, and how we can again look at different services that we work with, look at different interventions that aren't police enforcement interventions, that can help long term reduce crime and keep young people in particular safe. So I think the work there, just in relation to the community harm and exploitation plan, and we've already started early in terms of our officers looking at exploitation and trying to identify individuals concerned in that, is one step as part of that wider plan. And so I think the whole, if you put a thread really through a lot of these things, in terms of our engagement and how that increases access to services for local people, and how through dealing with things like exploitation and serious youth violence and knife crime, and lifting a lid on what the police do, and having a more transparent and local relationship with officers, all kind of follows a theme, if you like, in terms of making communities safer and having a police service that that people feel confident in, and increasingly confident in. So I think I'll perhaps pause there. I think the because I'm sure there'll be questions, and but I think what I will say is we have a incredibly committed workforce in Southwark, officers and staff hugely committed to make Southwark safer. We want to do an awful lot of work with local people, local groups around engagement and building trust and confidence, and continue that journey, and welcome the many partnership and community opportunities there will be, and we have to do so.
That's great, fantastic. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. I've already had 6 members who've indicated that they wish to put questions to you. So I'll start with Councillor Werner, please. Well, that was timely, wasn't it? Oh, gosh.
Yeah, that was timely. Thanks very much. So my questions are around domestic violence and modern day slavery. I'll be quick. I'll be to the point. So we've seen that domestic violence has risen 20% globally. I was wondering, has there been a spike in domestic violence cases in Southwark during COVID-19? And have you had the right resources to respond? And you mentioned in your report that you're going to be reviewing hate crime. Just wondering if misogyny will be part of this. In the Public Safety Commission I chaired last year, I found a high percentage of women and girls who we interviewed had experienced some sort of sexual harassment. So I was wondering if that's going to be included in the hate crime review. And then in terms of modern day slavery, some of the reports I've read said that human trafficking could soar once lockdown eases, and there may be traffickers who could capitalise on businesses' race to recruit low-paid workers, and there could be an increased risk of exploitation in places of work such as hospitals. I just wondered if you what you're doing to put the right measures in place to address these likely scenarios. So about domestic violence, misogyny, and human trafficking.
Okay, so
light subjects.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. So in relation to domestic violence, so this is something that we take incredibly importantly. It's one of our priorities. We review it every single day. Obviously, got highly trained officers that specifically deal with domestic abuse, and we also prioritise it with our response teams in terms of our response. And actually, some of the indicators around domestic abuse, such as response times, use of body-worn video by officers, first responders, are amongst the highest in London. And again, with our teams, just making sure they have the skills and equipment and the ability to do what we ask them to do to keep people safe. So what we've done, what we've seen in relation to violence with injury, so the last sort of 12 weeks, we have seen an increase in Southwark of about 30 offences compared to sort of the previous 12 weeks. So there's a bit of an increase over sort of the last sort of 3 to 6 months. I think it's been more reflected in some of the services that have received referrals and calls, and we've seen a number of referrals to our Marrocks increase, particularly. So we have seen a small increase in the number of offences. We've seen an increase in the arrest rate that officers are undertaking, and we've seen a month-on-month increase in the number of positive outcomes from investigations in relation to domestic violence and domestic abuse. So we are seeing that, and I think what's really important is we've got really good, strong partnership relationships. So we're making sure that we've got the right systems and processes and relationships in place to manage high-risk cases with partners. And during lockdown, going from in-person meetings to online meetings, for example, has been successful, and also regular contact between partners, the council, and our teams dealing with it. So, and that we'll build on that further and learn some of the lessons from lockdown. And again, one of the areas which we're keeping under review continually is and I think this will, it's just around school. So as people return to school, so historically, when people go back in September, children go back in September, you do see a spike in referrals around domestic abuse and so on, as children report what happened to them in school, and schools refer them in. So again, we're keeping that under review and have our schools officers and links in place so we can keep we can make sure that we respond in the right way and take action and intervene either ourselves or with partners as appropriate. So that piece will continue. In relation to the sort of modern day slavery, human trafficking sort of area of sort of crime. So again, historically, we've seen incidents, for example, around illegal gambling, unlicensed nail bars, sexual trafficking, and so on. And so we keep that, again, just around our use of intelligence, community intelligence and reports, so that we're able to identify premises or individuals concerned. So again, we can respond, intervene either with ourselves or with some of our partners and other agencies involved in this, either locally or through specialist crime and others. And also, just so that we're able to, for example, nail bars is, I think, historically in Southwark in particular, has featured. I've seen a few nods there, so those who know the borough better than I will be aware. And I think, again, as there's economic pressures and so on that we see, I think it's just been alive to that through educating and making sure our officers are well briefed and aware to look out for the signs to spot. And then able to put in a response in relation to the intelligence and information that we receive. So that is something that we do every single day in terms of our intelligence and information reviews. And of course, we'll always encourage the public and anyone to report circumstances or issues to us and come forward. And people can do that anonymously. And bear in mind, this is recorded and there's members of the public listening. So Crime Stoppers is a anonymous way if people don't want to give their details, or call us on 101. So again, just mindful of some of the impacts that COVID may bring to the economy and how those issues may present themselves. It's a good point, and it's something that we're alive to. And I think your last point around sexual harassment, yes, of course, in terms of the VORG strategy, and through our safeguarding teams, and through various partnership channels and groups that we regularly work with, and individuals having the confidence to come forward and report, then yes, we will listen, take allegations, investigate, and take action where we receive those reports. And again, just that whole arena around protecting women in particular from violence and young girls is one of our priority areas that, again, as I said before, we've got a very strong partnership strategy and specialist officers locally who regularly investigate these crime types. And it's a feature in terms of making sure that safeguarding is everybody's business, and routinely talking to our teams, our first responders and other officers in neighbourhoods, spotting the signs and being able to understand the steps they need to take where they come across it.
Thank you very much. Can I just come back? Thanks for your responses. In terms of making misogyny a hate crime, is that something you would look at?
So misogyny itself isn't and by all means, correct me wrong, it's not obviously defined under hate crime per se.
No,
is it?
It's not. No.
But in terms of some of the outputs as you described, in terms of unwanted sexual harassment, for example, and harassment laws, stalking, for example, is another arena. Social media and some of the unwanted harassment and so on around the use of, say, Twitter, Facebook and others. Our officers do come across and investigate these crimes on a regular basis. So misogyny is something that, in terms of, we have a just very briefly, so under safeguarding we have a head of profession led by a commander, which has different strands to it in terms of crime types, in terms of sexual offences, domestic abuse and others. So again, those kind of policy areas will be picked up through the central heads of profession that we have in the Met, and then that turns into policy, then turns into local delivery. But certainly, officers are increasingly becoming aware of these different sort of complex areas in which people can be abused and harassed, and where crime happens. And it's just making sure that people are alert and understand, and able to effectively respond. And they're also, the conversations that we'll have with the local authority and our safeguarding partners as well.
Thank you. Thanks for your response. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll take Victor next, please.
Thanks, Chair, and welcome to your new job, Colin, and thanks for coming tonight. Last time the Borough Commander came, I asked about conviction rates for homophobic hate crimes, because they are really, at a very low rate. And we have seen, in the last few years, a general increase in hate crimes of every type. Things like Brexit are fueling racial hate crime and religious hate crime. You've mentioned, I was just wondering if you'd like to elaborate a little bit more on what specifically you are doing in the borough to tackle hate crime and how we can support you as local councillors. But also, if you could go back to that issue that I did raise last time the Borough Commander came, about how we can increase conviction rates for homophobic hate crimes, because they are still way too low. It's something about 5.8%, I think. That's not good enough.
Yeah, no, and so one of the things we're currently doing is just reviewing our approach around hate crime. So one of my DCIs is undertaking that work, so particularly around the investigation side, but also I think really importantly around engagement. And that's one of the things that struck me in the last presentation, really, around those engagement opportunities and making people feel confident to come forward and report abuse and hate crime. So in terms of our neighbourhood officers, for example, being those local links, working with local groups and organisations that do that, but also looking at sort of borough-wide and other services that may be able to support local people, whether make reports and also help officers investigate and increase the detection rate. And detection rates or outcome rates, charging rates, as you've described, for all our crime types is an area we want to improve. and so around about 6%, as you've quoted. In some of our other crime areas, for example, such as robbery and burglary, are also in single figures. And so we want to lift the whole level of investigation and the ability for to follow lines of inquiry, gather evidence, and have successful prosecutions. And that's comes in many different ways. So there have been some changes in some of our investigation policies that have led to that. But in areas such as hate crime, domestic abuse, and others, we would take those extra steps where in other lower priority crimes we perhaps wouldn't. So CCTV is a good example. So I think so. You're right to raise it. It is something that we want to do across the board, particularly in our priority areas. We have our DCI undertaking that review and looking at ways in which we can improve investigations. We have detectives that work with our response teams that also provide additional help and support, which is something that was brought in around about the merger time. So in the last 12 to 18 months, again, aimed to provide some detective experience to first responders. We want our neighbourhood officers around, I've mentioned our engagement before, but again, making sure we've got those local links with groups so we can encourage more people to report. And I think even when we've got an area of crime where, relatively speaking to other crime types, it's all crime is unacceptable, but the numbers are relatively much lower than other crime types. And so sometimes in that the investigative opportunities don't always present, depending on how people have reported and what evidence is available. So I think there's something there in terms of how we just improve the quality of those first reports, so that we can improve our detections ultimately. I think probably next time I appear on Scrutiny, I'll hopefully be able to report back on some of that work. And if there are members or groups that would like to engage more with us around hate crime, and particularly homophobic hate crime, then we'd welcome those discussions and conversations and be able to sort of shine a light on what we do, and also explore what opportunities and ways to engage there are for us outwardly.
Great. Okay, thank you for that, Colin. I'm sure there'll be a couple of thousands queuing up outside the door.
Chair, could I just ask, could the cabinet member pick up on that last point about whether or not how we could engage further on homophobic hate crime?
Evelyn? You there, Evelyn?
I am, so I'm having some technical issues here. Okay. I didn't quite get your question, Victor. Was it Victor that asked the question? Can you just please?
Yes, well, yeah. Ask it again, Victor.
I was just asking, Evelyn, if you could just elaborate on how you think that we could be doing more to engage with the Met on tackling homophobic hate crime in Southwark.
Thank you for that question. I mean, that is an important area. I do know that I didn't hear all the conversation or the question you put to Colin. So, but I do know that the kind of arrest rate for homophobic crimes is rather low, and it's something that we have to work with the Met on finding, basically working with the LGBT community on how do we engage them. And obviously, I know there's an issue when issues like this happen. A lot of victims feel reluctant to give evidence, feel reluctant to actually go through the whole process. So it's about how we support them and ensuring that we get a result at the end of it. So it is about working with Colin and his team, but it's also working with the LGBT community to see how best we can support them in making sure that we get results at the end of any attack or any crime that may work. So maybe something that we can work with you going forward.
Okay, thanks for that, Evelyn. Can I call Peter now to ask his question, please, Peter?
Sirens.
Yeah, you're in Peckham, are you?
No, it's not me. It's someone else.
Oh, okay.
Colin, thanks very much for that. And I know you've been making a real effort to get around and speak to people, so that's appreciated. Community engagement. It feels like a huge part of community engagement is how people see you and how you treat people. In terms of how they see you, like, could you say a bit more about, from a kind of Southwark specific perspective, what more is being done to recruit more Black officers in particular? Could you say a little more about that? And then just on the treatment side, we've heard about how there's been lots of stop and search over the lockdown, including like huge numbers of Black men. Has that been reflected in Southwark? And just finally, kind of stop and search. We've had a lot of attention to cases of Black and other ethnic minority people being handcuffed and had rougher physical treatment during stop and search, including a number of cases in Southwark that have made the papers. It's really concerning to me, and could you just say a bit more about that and how you're working to make sure this isn't something that regularly happens in Southwark?
Yeah, so if I miss anything in my response, by all means come back. But I think so talking about the stop and search first. So in Southwark, we do see some of the highest levels in terms of volume of stop and search in London. I think usually in around about the top 5 or 6 boroughs in London. And part of that is around the volume of crime, and particularly around violent crime, robbery, knife crime, and so on, compared to other London boroughs. And we do see disproportionality in terms of ethnicity and more young Black males being stopped and searched by proportion than other groups. So it's something that we watch and monitor really closely, just in terms of a scrutiny activity. I mean, this is going to be quite a sort of a longish answer, so it's quite a complex area. But so we do have stop and search scrutiny group that will review and look at our levels of stop and search and how we stop and search and how we undertake that power. And that's an area that actually we want to improve and be more transparent about, because I think it's important that people understand why we do what we do, have the opportunity to ask questions and to challenge, and also to understand why the rights, powers, knowledge, the whole sort of area in terms of why stop and search is also incredibly important. So the recent Zoom meeting with Southwark's young advisors and the work looking forward around having a youth IEG would be incredibly important there. So we do see that. I think we also, and I think it just touches on what I said at the beginning about inequalities in sort of different sort of settings. So we see disproportionality reflected in different crime types, particularly around violence, knife crime for under 25s as well. And the Commissioner has spoken at the Home Affairs Select Committee about this. I also think it's just really important just to not to stereotype or categorize an entire community either, but on the same time just making sure that where we do undertake stop and search, it's intelligence led, it's in the right areas, officers are well briefed, well trained, and carry stop and search out with respect and dignity and professionalism. I think the other bit around handcuffing, so officers are well aware, so stop and search is a power, and so officers have to justify their use of every stop and search in the same way that handcuffing, if someone uses handcuffs to detain someone, so when someone is stopped and searched, for example, that is a detention, someone is detained for the purpose of stop and search, and so handcuffs, depending on the circumstances, can be used, and again officers need to justify that use as well. And explain to the person not only why they've been stopped and searched, but also explain if they need to detain that person and use handcuffs. And some of the reasons may be around violence, maybe around people handling drugs and not wanting someone to swallow drugs, for example. There could be other reasons, and again the officers would have to justify that. And every stop and search and every use of force or use of handcuffs is recorded. And the levels of that is publicly available on the Met's website, and it's borough by borough, so you can see Southwark's levels there. And again, these areas are also subject to internal supervision to make sure that those encounters are appropriate. And I think the other important piece area to note is around the use of body-worn video. So we make sure that our officers use it, and they regularly do use it. So over 95% of all those encounters are captured on body-worn video, which again is one of the highest in London. And we make sure that our officers themselves, for their own professionalism, make sure that they are using that too. And I've been out on patrol myself with officers in Southwark and seen them in action, talking to local people, using stop and search, engaging, a whole range of things. So it's not the only thing that officers do all the time. And from what I've seen, again, very professional, explaining what they're doing, building rapport with individuals, not always searching someone, sometimes just having a conversation and just seeing what's happening. Sometimes using handcuffs, sometimes not. But again, just making sure they explain what they do at the time. But that's not to say that we can always be better. We can always learn. And one of the recent things that we've been doing is working with an organisation called Mentivity. So one of our chief inspectors, Anne-Marie Cowley, who leads on stop and search for us, has been working with someone called Safe Homes Lewis, for example, and starting to have conversations with our new recruits and helping us with some awareness and some training. And that is something that we want to continue. And also actually at a local level, so on wards. So we have ward officers and groups speaking to local youth groups, for example, and having the same conversations around how people feel, why officers do what they do, and just having that feedback between the officers and local young people in estates and other places. So there's a lot of work here for us to do to make sure that people understand why we do stop and search and the way that we do it. And our officers understand themselves. And I think something that's really important to note is where we've seen stop and search in the last 18 months increase. We've seen the levels of knife crime with injuries for those who are under 25 drop in the last year by 40% in Southwark. On average, we take 6 knives off the streets every week in Southwark through stop and search, and any one of those could have injured somebody. So there is a really important reason why officers conduct stop and search, and why in some cases they will use handcuffs. And we are an incredibly scrutinised organisation, both as everyone has seen on social media, in the media, and the officers themselves now carrying body-worn video, using notes. Everything we do and how many we do and who we stop and who we use for, so it's all recorded on the internet in terms of statistics that are available for public scrutiny. So we're very open about why we do it and how we do it. And of course, we have a complaint system in place where people who wish to make complaints can do so. And in some cases, as people have seen, some of those are referred to the IOPC for additional scrutiny. And then some of those are referred back to the Met Police to deal with. And so we take it very seriously. And the officers understand that. And they are well trained. They understand the law. We have continual conversations around training. And they conduct themselves in the vast majority of cases with professionalism and courage, and as I say, take on average 6 knives off the streets in Southwark every single week.
Thank you, Colin. Can I bring in Helen, please?
Thank you very much for your presentation and for outlining those priorities. I wanted to ask a question about the use of police powers under the Mental Health Act. And about trends in the borough, how that's been impacted by COVID, so both kind of the use of Section 136 and 135 powers, but also obviously again in light of the Black Lives Matter movement, we have very kind of high numbers of particularly Black men in mental health detention, if you like. And I'd just be interested to know what training and what more you think could be done to address any kind of disproportionate or unconscious bias or inappropriate use of restraints in approaching mental health cases in the borough?
So again, the mental health issues and people's experiencing mental health and mental health crisis is something that officers come across every single day, and undertake a training on a regular basis in relation to mental health and the approach, either through officer safety training, through class-based training, and online training. Our response to mental health comes under our safeguarding strand. So it's led by a detective superintendent, and then we have a team that engage regularly with our mental health partners. And I think it's an area of policing that has advanced considerably, certainly since I joined many years ago, more than I choose to remember or can remember. And I think it's an area through COVID. So I was speaking to one of my colleagues a couple of days ago, just in relation to some of our missing person episodes and the prevalence of mental health there. And it's something that our officers take really seriously in trying to provide care for families and individuals who have gone missing, and people who may be in mental health crisis, and how we categorise those instances as high risk, so we can try and locate and identify and find those people as quickly as we can to make people safe. And that's our overarching aim, is to consider mental health as a medical emergency in many cases, and as a medical issue first. Yes, there is cases where we will use powers, particularly with our mental health partners, to detain people under the Mental Health Act where they pose a risk or a danger to themselves, first and foremost, and also to the public. And again, work very closely with mental health professionals to deal with those circumstances. And we have more advice available to us now more readily, with first responders attending those incidents than we've had ever before, which I think is a really positive step, and also increases people's awareness of and thought processes around treating these incidents as a medical emergency. And I think so. Certainly, just touch slightly on the Lambeth side. Certainly, work that is undertaken through Black Thrive, for example, where again, looking at sort of mental health in the community and having that scrutiny in there, and that's something that we're open to and continue to work with. And some of the areas, for example, where we've been questioned before and had some scrutinies around custody, for example. So now, we have a mental health nurse in custody. So then, when people are arrested for an offence, not necessarily detained under the Mental Health Act, but certainly arrested for an offence, but are exhibiting signs of mental illness, that we have in custody someone who's dedicated there, who can provide some advice and treatment advice, and also make connections into mental health services whilst that person is detained with us, to make sure they're cared for whilst we go through the sort of criminal justice steps. As I say, we've got much better join up around the use of our powers with SLAM, and we also have a joint assessment car where we go out and patrol with mental health professionals and respond to calls and incidents, so that knowledge and know-how is there much earlier than it's ever been before. And I think there are wider issues around the criminal justice and mental health, and also in relation to the experience of black men in particular in relation to mental health and criminal justice. And I think that there's always going to be work with partners and professionals around understanding why that is the case, and also thinking about how best to respond in those circumstances. Our starting point, as I said, is to think of this as a medical emergency in times of crisis. No one would want to take anyone to a police station that's suffering a medical emergency. That's not the an A&E or mental health hospital is where our officers go. So it's looking through the lens of a medical approach rather than a crime approach in those settings, and again through engaging with different groups and people with vastly more experience and professional knowledge around mental health are better to understand why there's disproportionality, tailor our approach, monitor that closely, work with our central mental health teams, and just make sure that our officers are well trained and are undertaking and doing the things we would expect them to do.
Okay, great. Thank you for
Sorry,
that.
can I just ask a quick follow-up, Chair, on that? Sorry.
Right.
I just wanted to just confirm, if you like, that police custody is not being used. So you are essentially using the SLAM place of safety, centralised place of safety now. And also a question about whether or not you do use police vehicles, or do you tend to use, you mentioned the joint assessment vehicle, but also working to ensure that people are transported in ambulances rather than in police vehicles.
Yeah, no. So to the first point about use of custody, correct. We don't. That would never be the first choice. It's a medical. If in a medical emergency, a hospital is the place to go, and an ambulance is the place to is the vehicle to get there. And officers completely understand that. And Ian was just saying, I don't think we're aware of a case in the Met this year where someone suffering mental health crisis has been taken into custody. I don't. So I'm sure there may well have been, but to the best of our knowledge, we're certainly linked in, and certainly not at Brixton.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Evelyn, did I miss you out? You wanted to come in and say something quickly?
I can say something at the end. That's fine.
Lovely. Okay. Thanks, Evelyn. I've got Jane next, please.
Sorry, technology. Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Colin, to Southwark. Obviously, extraordinary times, where there's been not a lot going on the streets, not a lot but I understand that officers reached out to habitual offenders during this time, and I just wanted to know, has that been successful, or have you felt it's been successful? And the other thing I wanted to follow up on is the use of the cameras, the body cams. Number one, when do officers turn it on, or is it always on? And number two, how long is the information that is caught on the body cams held for? Thank you.
Okay, yeah. So just on the body cam question first. So they're not on permanently. Officers have discretion generally when they can put it on, but they must always put it on in certain settings. So they must always put it on for a stop and search, for example. Must always put it on when they're attending a domestic abuse call, for example. And the reason for the second point, because I've already sort of explained the first one, around domestic abuse, is obviously they can capture evidence. And sometimes where victims of domestic abuse aren't willing to provide evidence and medical evidence, that can be captured on body-worn video. And then also when we show that video to perpetrators in custody, it often leads to an early guilty plea in court, which shortens the distress on victims for an early resolution. So we monitor that really, really closely as part of the use of body-worn video. It's incredibly a great innovation, and widely encourage it. I must briefly apologise. I've just forgotten the first question, I haven't answered the second. So, could you remind?
There was a second part to the body cam. How long is the information held for?
Yeah.
And the first one was about reaching out to habitual offenders during lockdown.
So on the answer to the second question, I don't know. I have to maybe feed that answer back to the chair after this.
Thank you.
But certainly, depending on different cases, it can be retained for as long as it's required for criminal purposes and criminal cases, and it's held on our sort of secure system. So I'll feed back the specifics. And then in relation to those visits, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they were supportive visits in terms of signposting, diversionary interventions such as employment training, and other sort of activities, so that those individuals or people that were on our systems has been either arrested or involved in violent crime in the past. And during lockdown, and as we come out of lockdown, we wanted just to signpost those kind of services to people, may have had a chance to reflect on life, so to speak, and maybe think about making a new start. I haven't got the exact figures here. However, part of that was done across London and is currently being evaluated as an evidence-based policing approach to see how effective that was. And I think it's also good to note that that was something that we spoke with Southwark Council at the time about, and gained had a lot of support, and looked and have sort of developed that further, just with other offenders and other types of visits. So, and I think it's a really good thing to do. Whereas often people don't know what's out there, and just sort of jumping on an opportunity to signpost some things, even if it just helps one or two people out of the dozens that we visited, then that's a good thing to do.
Thank you very much.
Yep. Thanks for that. And if I could just add to that, Colin, I noticed that, with the violence reduction unit in Glasgow, that they included ex-offenders as part of that programme, to talk to those young people that were engaged in knife crime. And, that has yielded some positive results up there. And as you know, the Mayor, Sadiq Khan, has made that type of crime a public health issue. So I'll be hoping that Southwark will be part and parcel of all that initiative, and perhaps that's something we could roll out a bit more locally too. Okay, so I think I've got Sonny Lamb next, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Collins. And it's nice to meet you. I have one or two questions I want to ask you.
One question, I'm afraid, given the time.
Okay, it's going to be 2 in 1. Trust me, and I'm going to make it fast. Police have been, police have been, unfairly criticized, I would say. I haven't been stopped and searched a few times myself on the street. Even the last one was even my own word. But however, I can understand how difficult it is, the work of the police. So my first question is, what do you think? What do you think the police? Do you think the police have been unfairly targeted in terms of all the criticism around, stop and search? And then the second part of that question is, do you think we, the policymakers, whether at local, national, and regional level, should take some degree of responsibility for putting you guys in that place in the first place because of our policies? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think we are an organisation, highly accountable, highly scrutinised organisation, and people are entitled to their views and so on. I think for us, as I said before, we've got an incredible group of officers and staff who work to keep people safe in Southwark. They work incredibly hard, do courageous things every single day, and are absolutely brilliant at it. There's always more that we can do to improve, and we are a learning organisation. And actually, we invite public scrutiny and looking at our different processes, particularly stop and search, as you mentioned it, to help us make those improvements. And I think where we've seen some of those social media clips, for example, sometimes you'll only get 20 seconds of a 15-minute encounter and you won't get the context of what has actually happened. And so you'd have seen we are more responsive now at looking at those clips, making reviews. So our complaints processes look at social media clips that are identified, make an assessment, and then we have some press lines that we then put out in response to those incidents. And in many of the cases that we've seen locally, there's been no misconduct issues, and we've been able to provide an explanation around what the officers were doing. And I think that sort of feedback loop and back into the community is also really important. But at the same time, as others here have commented and others do tell us, the quality of the interactions and how some officers interact, there's always room for improvement. And I think we want to be able to engage, we want to be able to communicate, we want to be able to explain what we do. There are some instances where that's almost entirely impossible because officers are responding to a violent incident and they have to deal with the immediate risk to the public and obviously themselves. But where they're able to, they will do. So I think your second point was just around sort of the policies I guess that exist that put us in that position. At the end of the day, we police by consent. We police with the laws provided by Parliament. So the laws that cover stop and search, and everything we do is through parliamentary acts and common law and so on. And so, and subject to police regulations in the way that we conduct ourselves. So it's all covered in acts and sections and so on. And so that's a matter for the lawmakers. Our duty is to keep people safe, protect the public, preserve the Queen's peace, and prevent damage to property, etc. And we will do that because that's our job, without fear or favour, impartially, to the very best of our abilities. And that takes a lot of courage sometimes, because not everyone wants you to do. People don't want to be arrested. People who have got things to hide don't want them to be found. And also, some of the things that we do is not precise science, because stop and search is a good example of that. We want it to be intelligence-led. We want to patrol in the right places. We want to identify the right people carrying knives and drugs and stolen goods and so on. But sometimes, people who may be repeat offenders and acting suspiciously and posing those reasonable grounds to officers, aren't carrying what the officers thought they might be carrying, and so you will get those instances where we don't always find something. So again, that's why scrutiny by community members is important. Why training for officers is important. Use of body-worn video is important. And then the actual laws of the land are a matter for Parliament and others to decide.
Yes, we're the ones that make the unpopular laws. Don't worry about that. Last but no means least, my ward colleague, Jason. Is he there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you so much, Colin, for making the time, and welcome to your new post. Thank you for the solidarity that you've shown towards the Black community, particularly around Black Lives Matter. So I have a few quick fire questions that shouldn't last you more than 5 seconds to answer. How many officers do you have in the force in Southwark and Lambeth?
As of June 2020, 1,540.
Okay, how many of them are Black officers?
214.
And then how many of those Black officers?
So that's Black, Asian, and minority ethnic officers.
Okay, how many of them are Black officers?
Yeah, we don't, for policy reasons, we don't break the Black, Asian, minority ethnic down further. Okay. So unfortunately, I can't give you that data.
Okay, so 214 Black, Asian, other minority ethnic officers. Thank you. And how many of those Black, Asian, minority officers hold senior positions, i.e. sergeants, inspectors, chief inspectors, and superintendents? And then that'll lead me to my final question that shouldn't last you long to answer.
That's fine. So believe me that I don't want to sound defensive at all about this, and I'm quite happy to have a conversation offline about the steps that we take around progression, recruitment, and different ranks and so on. But unfortunately, I can't give you that information because, again, HR policies in the Met mean that we, by borough level and BCU level, we don't break down the Black, Asian, and minority ethnic data further by rank. And part of that is so that individuals aren't identified with protected characteristics. So,
okay, I understand that. My final question, because I was reading the police leadership report that followed a commission by government. It's not my bedside reading, but I was reading it with some interest. And of those in the leadership in the police force across the UK, only 0.2% are Black officers. And my concern is, and it's linked to the question that my colleague, Councillor Peter Babudu, raised around recruitment, but goes a bit, but just builds on that, is around leadership and the strategy makers, as it were, within
police force in Southwark and Lambeth Joint, understandably, and the representation of those senior officers reflecting the communities in which make up Southwark, specifically in this case, which around 23% of the population in Southwark's Black, a further around 13% are Asians, and another 10% are around other ethnic minorities. And so I just wanted to ask you what steps that you were taking following, your appointment, though new, to ensure that there is a redress imbalance in the leadership in the force within Southwark and Lambeth, as well as improving on the number of 214 officers that currently exist amongst the BAME community.
Yeah, I mean, so firstly, to your general point, I couldn't agree more, and certainly that is something that myself and leadership team and others are really committed to doing, as is the Commissioner and the senior leadership team of the Met. On a borough level, we have what we call a stride meeting, which is a borough level meeting where we look at inclusion, diversity and equalities in terms of our policies, recruitment, engagement. One of the new things that has come about is each BCU now has an HR outreach worker to assist in recruitment. And I'm glad you brought me back to that, because I didn't answer the question the first time around. So thank you for bringing me back to the subject around recruitment. And their role is to network with organisations, working with schools officers, community groups, Job Centre Plus, and you may have seen on our Twitter feed online Twitter sessions and Teams and Zoom sessions around recruitment. So we want to absolutely increase representation at all levels locally, and that is something that the Met is striving to do at all levels. And I think where we've seen increases in recruitment in recent times, particularly where we had the London qualification for recruitment, that was particularly good at increasing representation for the Met as a whole. So locally, for us, it's about how we work with our own HR teams centrally to increase or make Southwark and Lambeth, because we are sort of BCU, an attractive place for people to come to. And part of that is around having role models in senior levels as well, whether it's sergeants, inspectors, and so on. So again, that forms part of our sort of ongoing work and activity we have, and just making sure that we sort of build those pipelines internally to attract people who are entering the organisation. And those pipelines is that theme that I sort of touched on at the beginning around engagement into community groups, to make the Met an attractive place for people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities to join us. And I would ask for all of your help in that endeavour. So by all means, I'm very willing to do more in that arena. On a personal level, I'm a College of Policing coach, as are many of my senior colleagues. So we coach and mentor people within the organisation, and actively coach and mentor Black, Asian, minority ethnic officers, as well as female officers as well. So any leader in any organisation should be a mentor and should assist and should share their own leadership experience and knowledge to help others. I just think that's a fundamental principle of leadership, is how we pass the baton on to the next generation, and no less importantly than where we're trying to increase representation as well. So that is something that we're all signed up to and passionate about improving. So I think, as I say, it's an area that we return to on a very regular basis. We work closely with our HR colleagues. We want to include recruitment and those opportunities as part of our engagement at neighbourhood levels with partners and so on. Stuff with our schools. We get our police cadets, special constables, which are far more representative than our general police population. So again, making sure we have those consistent pipelines to improve representation, and when people join the organisation, to make sure we've got those internal support mechanisms in place. One of the things that we have been found challenging, and our Black, Asian, and minority ethnic officers have found challenging recently is sadly levels of abuse that they've experienced when out on patrol, whether at protests or patrolling our streets. And so again, just making sure in terms of the experience they've found from members of the public. So we have changed some of our principles to provide additional support to officers who have experienced what's effectively hate crime towards our own officers, which is unacceptable. And because we want to make sure that working for the Met Police is a safe place for people to come to, which it is, and that we support and enable our colleagues to do their best to protect and serve communities and reduce all those problems that unfortunately affect every community around crime, community safety, and all those topics we've talked about. So this whole arena that you've kind of touched on, there's an awful lot of work that we do both in Southwark and Lambeth as a BCU, but also as part of the Met.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm conscious that we spent an hour and 20 minutes so far, and we're overdue a break. So I'm going to ask Councillor Elisa to just ask a quick question and then bring Evelyn in to finish off the session. So Victoria, can you ask your question, please?
Yeah. Thank you for your presentation, Colin. I think my quick question was just about to follow on from my colleague Jason about recruitment in terms of how have you got any close liaison with the Black Police Association? The reason why I asked that because my brother was in the Met for 30 years, and that is a good source of maybe potential recruitment, but finding out concerns and reasons why people aren't progressing to leadership roles. Because I've heard what you said about using all the external things, HR, liaison, and special constables. But for me, sometimes I think let's start with the source. If you've got a whole cohort of BME police within the police force, why don't you find out from them their concerns and reasons why they're not progressing, and also try and, I suppose, deal with some of those institutional obstacles some of them may have? Because I think with the Met Police, we have to be honest with ourselves and saying, rather than looking external, what about the cohort of people we have within the organisation? Why aren't they progressing? Is there something we need to do? And is there something we need to do in terms of changing the fundamental internal structures? That's all I wanted to say, Chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And in fact, Janet Hills, the chair of the Black Police Association, the Met Black Police Association, she participated and assisted us with a recent staff forum. So it's an area that we're very mindful of, and we're blessed with officers who are part of the Black Police Association, able to assist colleagues and others, not only in sort of daily experiences, but also shine a light on us in terms of what we can do more to progress, recruit, retain, and support our Black and Asian minority ethnic colleagues. And it is one of the reasons I wanted to be a coach and a mentor, so I could play my part in progression and now helping people navigate through the various sort of processes and obstacles, if you like, in terms of progression and promotion and other areas. So absolutely with you there, and it's a really good observation and something that again we will keep returning to and working with our colleagues at the Black Police Association and other staff associations that we have in the Met.
Great, thank you. I'll just bring in Evelyn then, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. There's a lot of things I wanted to respond on, but I do understand the time has spent, so I won't talk too much. But I just wanted to say that it's important to acknowledge the hard work that the police do and the difficult situations they sometimes find themselves in. And that things like stop and search is one of the tools used and needs to be used to curb violence, especially youth violence on our street. But I think it's also equally important to call out procedures that appear to be disproportionate or hindering community relations. We work very closely with Colin and the team, and I must say they've been very, very open. I recently had a meeting with Chief Inspector Anne-Marie Cowley on stop and search data, and I have requested to get ongoing data on this, coupled with details on ethnic breakdown. So we know who is being stop and search and the reasons for. I mean, this is something really important that we can continue to kind of keep an eye on this and challenge if need be. Also, Colin mentioned the meeting we had with over 70 young people in Southwark, and Colin has always been very open with meeting with residents, and I think this is one step of making sure that the community and police relation improves. And now we are in the process of creating a youth IAG, independent advisory group to the police, and I think it's important that the young people of Southwark who are disproportionately impacted when we talk about stop and search have that kind of connection with the police and can advise the police on going forward. And just to kind of answer some of the few points that was been raised regarding relation to habitual offenders that was mentioned, we did have some take up from Southwark. Some of our offenders did take up that offer to turn their life around in small numbers, but we did, however, have some take up, which is great news. You talked about ex-offenders and the public health approach. We have adopted the public health approach in Southwark, and we have created a community harm and exploitation hub, which uses ex-offenders to be able to support other young people who may be going through it that way. And this is a wraparound service. This is a service that concentrates on the family as opposed on the individual that used to be the case going forward. And I think with that, I will stop that. But I just want to say thank you to Colin and welcome to Southwark again. And I must say, I mean, he's been very open and willing to work with us and willing to work with the community to improve things. And we'll be working with him on the Southwark Stands Together roundtable on policing.
Yes, and I must add my apologies to not welcoming you to Southwark, Colin. I'm sure you feel as if you've been here a long time already, and but we do appreciate what you do and your officers do on our behalf and the members of the public's behalf, and we do appreciate you coming along here this evening, giving fulsome and informative responses to the questions that members have asked. I know the officers under your command are committed to engaging with the local public to build that trust, as you quite rightly say, and the council is here obviously to facilitate that at the same time. And we do appreciate the work you all do in these very difficult times. And as a former chief whip, can I say that enforcing the law at times can be not the easiest and the most popular job. So I understand where you're coming from. So yes, so thank you once again. We wish you all well, and as you say, hopefully we'll see you again in the new year. So thank you, and thank Superintendent Howells as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Our pleasure. Okay, I'm sorry, we're going to have another break because obviously Councillor Ali's her eyes are straining on the screen. So we'll call again. That was it. No, it's nearly 22. So should I say 8:45 then? At 8:45 we'll reconvene. Thank you very much.
Hi, Councillor Lowry. You've just turned your camera on instead of off.
Okay. People coming back. Good.
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Should we kick off? Yep. Okay. As I indicated before, I wanted to take item 8 quickly, if I may, because we've all had conversations about this before, and I just seeking your endorsement that we can go ahead on that basis. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. And then items 9, 10, 11 are information items, as I indicated before, if that's okay. Yes. And then item 7, leisure management contract post-COVID review and management of arrangements, which has been referred to as from the Cabinet. Now, we've invited a number of people along this evening to talk to this item. Obviously, we've got Councillor Lurie here, as you know, as the lead Cabinet member. Is Rebecca Towers with us? Yeah.
I'm here, Chair.
Thank you, Rebecca. And then I know I can see David Bibby. He's been on my screen for some time, so good evening to you. Are your colleagues with you this evening, David?
Yes, I have 2 colleagues with me. There's Mark Rasker, who I can see on my screen, and Duncan Jefford, who I think is also on the call.
Okay, jolly good. Yes, I can see you now. Thank you. Sue Harding, is Sue here?
Yes,
No?
Chair, I'm here.
Jolly good. Thank you. And Paul Stokes, is Paul Stokes here?
Hello, yep, I'm here.
Excellent. Thank you, Paul. Thank you. I just wanted to check, make sure everybody's in position before we start. Okay, so as you know, the item's been referred by Cabinet members, so I'll call upon the Cabinet member first of all to explain why she's referred it to her. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ian. And I just wanted to thank you to start off with for accommodating this item so quickly on the agenda. We're very grateful that we've been able to fit it in before the summer break. There's a lot of background noise, so I don't know if some people need to mute as well.
If people could switch off their microphones, please. Is Fitzroy, are you here, Fitzroy?
That's better. Thanks, Ian.
Okay.
So I know that members of the committee will have had a copy of the report that was taken to Cabinet earlier this month, but I thought it'd be useful to give a quick introduction and just set a bit of the context for the decision that we took at that meeting. So Free Swim and Gym was obviously one of our most ambitious policies back in 2014 and something that we're incredibly proud of as a borough. And it's why in 2018 we wanted to go further and commit to making Free Swim and Gym more flexible and to introducing free swimming lessons. And when we originally retendered the leisure services contract back in 2016, we were looking for a partner who shared this ambition and who were able to provide an exemplary service to the borough. However, over the last 4 years, a lot's changed in the leisure market and a lot's changed since we entered the contract with SLM, and the impact of these changes has only been amplified by the COVID-19 pandemic. Although I think it's important to say, and as the Cabinet report states, there were discussions about the future of this contract ahead of COVID-19 arising as an issue. We're obviously now coming to the time when leisure centres are going to be allowed to open. And it seemed like it was the best time for us to reconsider the whole of our leisure services provision. So what the decision is that we took was not an easy decision to reach, and there's much more work that will need to be done to ensure the smooth transition to a new and hopefully post-COVID-19 way of operating our service. But the report and the recommendations contained within it are the beginning of the journey to ensure that our leisure services continue to serve our residents in the way that they want, whilst we as a local authority can lead the way in what an exemplary leisure service looks like. As such, the decision at Cabinet was for a medium-term financial support package for SLM, which will allow us to reopen leisure centres as soon as possible after the 25th of July and continue to operate them until March 2021, whilst we consider options for future provision. Alongside this, our proposal is to begin a full review and evaluation of the options for the future management of all of our leisure centres, including full consideration of how we might insource the service as soon as practically possible. we would propose bringing that report back to Cabinet in September for final sign-off. But obviously we wanted to allow for full transparency and ask to raise any number of questions that they have about the decision that has been taken. So I will leave it there for now, unless, Rebecca, you want to add anything at this time.
Not at the moment, thank you, Councillor Lurie.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that, especially your conciseness and brevity at this time of night. Okay, so I think, sorry, yes, perhaps I think we bring in the management now, everyone active. David, did you want to say a few words at this stage, please?
Yes, I think just to say, I have read the report. I can absolutely understand why the council is taking the approach they are. I think it is the right time to consider the provision of the service generally. It's obviously a pivotal time for leisure services within the borough and within the country generally, and I think it's sensible for the council to consider a full options review. So we're happy would not be the right term, because obviously it's a difficult time for us as management operator, but we're more than willing to cooperate with the review, and hopefully we'll be able to come to a conclusion that's right for the borough of Southwark.
Okay, great. Do any of your colleagues want to add to that at this stage, or no? Okay, that's fine. Okay, Sue, I think, is next. Do you want to just say anything at this stage, Sue, at all?
Well, I do want to say that everyone active themselves are very, very professional, and I'm sure they will do everything in order to make it safe for us here in the gym, because the staff are very thorough. Everybody's very thorough. So I think that's about my bit for now.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And sorry, Paul, did you want to say anything at this stage at all?
No, nothing further to add from me. I'll just be representing in terms of the exercise and referral element of the leisure management contract, if there's any queries around that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, I've got a couple of members that have already indicated that they wish to ask some questions. So I've got Humera, first of all, please.
Oh, can you hear me now? Sorry.
Yes.
Thanks very much. The paper looks fairly comprehensive, and without second guessing what the answer might be, so I appreciate you've got to have that debate. Any funds that we've given to SLM, have we put any conditions around those funds? And so where I'm going with this, just for a bit of context, is in the paper it says that actually the uptake of the services were never quite as what we had envisaged. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Can everyone else go on mute, please? Sorry. Hello? Okay. So in the paper it says that when we originally contracted, the level of services aren't being used in the way that we had envisaged, and you know, at this moment in time, I appreciate leisure services across the country will have had the same level of impact. Therefore, you know, we are saying, well, okay, we'll bail people out, or we'll provide some sort of grant for a period, you know, for over a period of time. The question is that does that come with any conditions, or is there any opportunity to tweak any of the services, or try and get a better understanding of why some of our own council objectives are not being met in that uptake? So I'll stop there. And that question is both to Rebecca and to SLM.
Okay, Rebecca, please.
Shall I start, Rebecca T, and then you can come in after me? Thanks, Mara. So I guess from my point of view, there are always things that we should be re-looking at within the contract with SLM, and obviously there are commitments around both swimming lessons and the flexibility of free swim and gym that were already being discussed before COVID-19 happened. Those conversations are ongoing, and there will be further announcements about kind of flexibility around free swim and gym that we are hoping to be able to make in the coming weeks and months. Obviously, things were put on hold slightly because of everything that was going on, but we're really keen that, especially at the moment, whilst people need to be more active and lockdown is lifting, that we can make sure that those services are being provided for people. Our hope is that we would be able to see a continued delivery of free swimming lessons and of the free swim and gym in its current form, but those are conversations that we will be having, well, the officers will be having with everyone active, to see the best way in which these can be delivered, especially while there would still be restrictions on the number of people who might be able to attend classes or the number of people who you might be able to have using swimming pools at a certain time. Obviously, we might need to scale back on things like swimming lessons if you physically can't have that many people in a swimming pool in the numbers that we would have had to previously. And I think then what you've got is the period over the summer where we look at what a new service actually looks like, and we would want to build into that everything that addresses some of the original concerns that there are about whether free swim and gym is delivering in the way that we want it to, and also making sure that both flexibility and free swimming lessons are built into that as well. Rebecca, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just thought it was worth a mention that I think Everton circulated the user figures, attendance figures, and a breakdown of attendees at leisure centres, and I think it's right to say that general attendance figures have grown year on year, which suggests that the performance of the leisure centres has been good. And in addition, the breakdown of users against, so the priority groups, which are detailed in that report, shows again an increase year on year of those priority users, so women and girls, disability groups, under 16s, etc. And in addition to that, free swim and gym has been very, very popular. I would suggest it's been more popular than we could have predicted. And the new swimming lessons have been oversubscribed. So I think in terms of people attending our leisure centres and valuing them, I personally don't think that has been an issue. Just to answer Councillor Ali's question.
Okay.
I hope that's helpful.
Yep. I know Councillor Ali wants to come back. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So the context of my question is as follows. Firstly, it's nice that the numbers are growing, but I think unless I've misunderstood the report, I was trying to get a sense of what your original intended figures were, and I read the report that said actually we're still not anywhere near our original intended figures. So whilst it's growing, that's great. The reason why I'm bringing in, the granting of money to kind of help for the period of time that they've been closed is also in relation to this piece of news that's come through around dividends being taken from the company, further up the chain, and the ability for the company to remain afloat or at least deliver our services. If our services weren't really being delivered in the first place, we've got dividends being taken out the other end. There's a question going forward about, can we tie some conditions to any funds that we give to SLM? And I think that's where I'm going with that.
So can I just clarify, Hamara? You're talking about the income gap rather than the number of people using free swim and gym, because that's not what's included in the report. What's included is the income gap.
Right, so I'm not even talking about free swim and gym. I'm talking, the way I've understood your report was that when you entered into the contract, you had a level of anticipation about overall usage of the facilities, and we're not meeting that. And therefore,
I think there's confusion there. What it says in the report is about the gap in income, which isn't necessarily about usage. It's actually about the amount that everyone active bid for the contract in the first place and how much income they thought they would be able to generate. And that doesn't necessarily relate to the usage of leisure centres.
Okay.
If that makes more sense.
That does make more sense, because I think it's just about actually making sure that we're actually getting what we're purchasing. And if we're not getting what we're purchasing, and then there's a whole load of other shenanigans going on in the background, especially in the times that we're about to enter, I want to make sure that actually we're getting bang for buck and that owners further up the chain are not being tone deaf to the issues that we have here in Southwark and broader society.
It might be a question that actually you want everyone active to answer rather than us, from the point of view about the income difference and the usage number.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I was just about to make that point. What would also be useful, I think, at this stage, David, is if you could comment on the financial impact of free swimming gym and also all these pop-up gyms which are appearing on every street corner as well, the impact of that on your business or your original business model. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, of course. It's kind of ironic in that we have achieved the usage numbers that we predicted, but it's the success of free swim and gym and relatively the reduced numbers of people actually paying to use the service that's caused us a financial problem. So not necessarily a problem for the service as such, but a financial problem for us. The income that we projected, we've fallen about £1.7 million a year short of where we anticipated being, which has obviously caused us a financial difficulty. Just looking forward and going to the original question, when Councillor Ali asked about what guarantees you've got going forward and how can you be sure that the money is going to be used as you would expect it to be, I think it's just fair to point out that the arrangement that we've come to with the council is that we will provide monthly figures to the council, audit access to those figures, and the council will only pay the actual operating deficit of the centres. So the payment in the next 6-month period is only to support the operation in Southwark. We've also, I think, officers and ourselves have recognised that coronavirus has changed an awful lot of things, and it probably will be appropriate to look at the free gym and swim scheme, because unfortunately we know there's going to be an awful lot more people out of work in the borough over the next few months, and it might be appropriate to look at times when we operate that free swim and gym scheme. It might no longer be appropriate to look at it just as a weekend scheme. There may be other things that people need, and whilst we don't actually know how that's going to pan out yet, because of course we haven't even opened the facilities. That's hopefully is going to happen next week. There is a recognition that we have to watch very carefully how things work, and we have to flex the service for the needs of the community. And of course, Rebecca and her colleagues are very involved in that.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, David. I've got Councillor Edwards next, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I've got one question which I guess is kind of for officers Rebecca and David, and then I'd like to ask a second question which refers more directly to the details of the dividends that were mentioned at Cabinet and which Hamira referred to just there. I won't immediately ask that question because it may be, Chair, that you wanted to consult with Norman over whether or not we needed to go into closed session for that particular question. But I'll ask my first question first, if that's okay, and then
yeah.
I'll maybe, if you need a bit more detail from me, then.
I mean, if things are in the public domain already, then I don't think we have to. Obviously, if it's
all right, hopefully not. All right, okay. I just wanted to forewarn you rather than jumping straight in because you mentioned going to private session. So the first question is, obviously we're going into a period now whereby the SLM, everyone active, know that eventually there's going to be a significant change, and it's, you know, the future, and that they're not going to get the deal that they had, and the future doesn't involve them in the terms of the long term. What are the guarantees that during that period we're going to get the kind of high levels of service and cooperation and working with the council that we need to have to make sure we maintain good levels of service, and that we're not going to see, because, you know, people are moving on, we're not going to see a drop off in that and high vacancy rates and all the other problems that we've seen previously in Southwark, where we've got a contractual relationship with an organisation and they know that that is going to end. So I'll perhaps go to Rebecca first, and if anybody else wants to come in on that, I think it'd be good to get some reassurances.
Okay, thank you.
Go on, Rebecca.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say which Rebecca. Is that me?
Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
sorry.
Do you want to start and then I'll come in after?
Yeah.
It's really confusing. Sorry.
Sorry about us being Rebecca's. So the first thing to say is the contract's still in place until such time as there's the options appraisal and any considerations of what at the moment, what the options we're considering, the detail of that isn't, we haven't even worked it through. So the contract's still in place. The contract's got KPIs, key performance indicators. The monitoring regimes are all in place and will continue to be in place. This is a contractual relationship between the council and an experienced and respected in the industry, well-established contractor, and it's in everyone active's interests to continue to deliver in Southwark until such a time as that, if and when that contract ceases to exist in its current guise. And I'm quite confident that everyone active would want to, if a relationship ends with Southwark, would want that relationship to end on a positive note, because I think is it 55 contracts around the country that everyone active runs, and it's an important business, and I know that they have a reputation to maintain as we go forward into the next, within the next year and onwards. So I personally feel quite confident, but I think David might want to say some words about that.
Absolutely, thanks, Rebecca. I was actually going to say very similar. It's actually 62 contracts that all with local authorities, and we're very jealous of our reputation with local authorities. We recognise that there's going to be a spotlight on the situation in Southwark, because obviously it's not good for any operator of any council service to have a contract terminated early. So our aim over the next 6 months, 12 months, whatever we're looking at, assuming the council decides that the right option is to take the contract back in-house, our aim is to cooperate fully and to leave on good terms, and to persuade the council to be a supportive reference for us when we're looking for other local authority contracts in the future, and really to be able to hold our heads up high in Southwark and say things happened which were beyond our control, and we dealt with them professionally, and we left the service in a good situation. And to be honest, if we don't manage to say that, it could potentially be very damaging to the business, and professionally it'd be something I'd be quite embarrassed about.
Okay, thank you. Chair, is it okay if I follow up?
Yes.
Is that okay now? Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for those reassurances. That's welcome to hear. I do want to ask now about the references made in the cabinet meeting that are in the public domain about the dividends that have been paid, millions of pounds over the last 2 years. The figure that's been used, which is in the public domain, is £15.5 million to directors of the ultimate owners of everyone active. Now, you'll understand our concerns when we hear in your first contribution tonight, you're talking about the financial troubles facing your organisation. When we hear that £15.5 million has been paid in dividends to that organisation. So on the one hand, we're hearing, in polite terms, you pleading poverty, and on the other hand, we're hearing that certain individuals are receiving very, very large amounts of money in the not too distant past. Now, how do we square that circle? How do you explain to me, as a councillor at a local authority which is handing over additional funds to your organisation, how that has happened and how it can be justifiable?
Yeah, just to clarify numbers first, the £15.5 million is dividends that have been paid by SLM up to our parent company, Castleview Ventures Limited. The ultimate shareholder is a Scottish gentleman called Martin Bell. Martin Bell has then received dividends of £2 million from Castleview. So I know it's still an awful lot of money, and I'm not trying to dodge the question, but he hasn't received the sort of headline number, if you like, the 15.5 million. To put the £2 million into context, SLM and the Castleview Group have been a successful business overall over the last 5 years, and Martin Bell has benefited, I think, enormously from that.
Okay.
if it's worth anything, I can say there has been no dividend in the last 12 months. That would normally be declared at the end of March and obviously wasn't because of the situation. And Martin has committed to not drawing any dividend in the future until such time as things are back on track and coronavirus is behind us.
Okay, well, thank you for that explanation and for the clarification over the figures. Except if it's been a successful company in other parts of the country as well. But, you know, my final point, not so much a question, is if it's a successful business, it's a big business with lots of contracts across the whole of the country. It would be nice to see some of that success shared so that it could cover a bit more of the costs that are actually having to be covered by Southwark Council at a time when we would like to be spending our money on other things. And that's not a question necessarily for you, but if you could feed that back up the chain, I would appreciate that, because you can appreciate that residents of this borough will not necessarily take kindly to the kind of figures that they're hearing about if it's 2 million or 15 million. I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you for indulging me.
It's okay. I'm indulging everybody tonight, so I won't miss you out. Okay, I've got Jason next, please.
Hi. Thank you, Chair. My question is to David. David, can you explain to me the